cloud recording here. And what's going to happen is we're going to broadcast right now. I'm going to do a sound check with our attendees, give them some time to get on.
Cool.
Just remind you that we are talking to health coaches today. And I'm going to see if I can go out and do get on the live on Facebook and see if it's going to cooperate today. So we'll just take 1 minute.
Sure.
Hi, everybody. If we can get a sound check in the chat, tell me we're good to go. That would be fantastic. And give me 1 minute. We're checking technology, as we all know, can be fun. And then I'm going to do a proper introduction, and we're going to get rolling into one of the, I think, what I would consider one of the hottest topics out there today.
Absolutely.
Golly, I mean, and let me tell you, Freddie just speaks crazy about you. He is, yeah, Freddie Kimmel. Do you remember Freddie?
I don't remember where do I know Freddie from?
Well, he'll probably pop in here, but he either studied you or did your protocol, or I don't remember where it came from because it was last year when you were brought to my attention. But oh, it looks like we've got people getting their notebooks out. Okay, so we're good to go. Thank you guys so much. Let me go ahead and just give a proper introduction here. Dr. Frank Sabatino is the past health director of the Shangri-La Natural Hygiene Institute in Bonita Springs, Florida, the Regency Health Resort and Spa in Hallandale, Florida, and the health director owner of Ocean Jade Retreat in Lauderdale by the Sea, Florida, where he cared for, lectured, and inspired thousands of people over the past 40 years. He is currently the director of Balance for Life Retreat program in Deerfield Beach, Florida. Balance for Life Retreat is a vegan lifestyle education center specializing in plant-based vegan nutrition, health rejuvenation, stress management, I think I need to come here, therapeutic fasting, and detoxification. Dr. Sabatino has personally supervised thousands of water-only fasts, promoting recovery from a wide range of conditions, including arthritis, allergies, high blood pressure, diabetes, addiction, asthma, and certain forms of cysts and tumors. He is truly one of the world's leading experts in water-only fasting. I'm not kidding. I may need to come and see you. This is exciting. So welcome, and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to be with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to share some time with you guys. It's great.
Yes, and let me remind you, you're talking to health coaches, and I'm telling you, as we were coming more mainstream, health coaches are coming more mainstream, they're going to be able to spread your message and what you do in a bigger way than most people could ever imagine. So you're not just reaching, 31 or 50, whoever joins, you're reaching thousands and thousands of people through this avenue. So let's jump right into it, and let's talk about, I want you to explain to us the importance of ketogenic fasting. Let's say, what is it and what's the importance of it?
Well, right now, one of the big things that has a heyday of popularity is you hear this term intermittent fasting, and it's become very popular. And that's really more about a timing pattern of food restriction and food use. So it really wouldn't come under the incredible heading of what we describe as fasting. Though, don't get me wrong, it has tremendous value, because what happens with intermittent fasting, people are taking all of their food in a day within a certain window of time and then having an extended period where they don't eat. And by doing that, let's suppose they're getting a little bit more involved with the natural cycle of things. For example, we're diurnal animals that should be winding down as we get into the evening. So finishing our food 5, 6 early evening and then having a good 12, 14, 16-hour period has a real value in promoting growth hormone release, reducing insulin, reducing storage, and promoting more metabolism. But what we're talking about is a period of time where you are consuming water only for an extended period of time. This goes way beyond the concept of an intermittent timing pattern of eating. And under those conditions, the body has to deal with physiological changes that produce some of the magnificent effects of fasting. So, for example, when I stop eating all food, now there's no sugar, no carbohydrate coming in. So the body now will have sugar reserves that can last for 24 to 36 hours. But if you continue to not eat longer than that, the body now has to create an energy has to create energy from other existing materials. And it'll go into a gluconeogenesis. Initially, it'll break down protein a little bit. But if you wind up doing it under total resting conditions, it totally shifts into fat metabolism. And as it breaks down fat for energy, the intermediate products of fat breakdown are the materials we call ketones. So the body will enter into a ketotic state, utilizing fat as an energy source. And I mean for extended periods of weeks. without eating anything or taking anything into the body with water alone. So when we say it's ketogenic, it just means that under the pressure of no nutrition coming in, the body leans on available reserves, primarily fat, breaks that fat down, and the steps of fat breakdown produce ketones, which now the body and the brain can shift into using as an energy source.
Okay, that was a great explanation, and I'm glad you explained the difference between intermittent fasting and what this really is, because intermittent fasting is, I don't eat for 12 to 16 hours, after my last meal at night. I don't even feel hungry. I usually eat on instinct. So what do you think about that? And I know we have a list of things we're going to cover in the next hour, but what are your thoughts about that, about paying attention to?
I think it's really valuable because we have a culture, as you know, that's a culture of excess. So you have people eating around the clock and they're eating into the late night hours. The truth is we are an animal that really evolved the idea of being active in the day, fending for ourselves, and at night probably hiding from predators and really getting into repose and quiet place and preparing for the next day. So if you look at the rhythms and cycles, we really should at night have a time where we're winding down from food use, from activity, from everything and all the chatter of the day. And that's the natural cycle of the body. All the hormonal cycles are on that cycle. Everything is on that cycle. So the idea of maybe taking from, let's say, 6 or 7 at night and not eating until, 8, 9 the next day, at least a minimum of a 14-hour period, has tremendous value. It gives the digestive tract a break. It lowers insulin release, so you're not driving things into storage. It tends to move things from storage outward. You're getting an increase in growth hormone release. You're giving the digestive tract a break, and you're allowing the hormonal environment of the body, in a sense, to find its natural rhythm and balance. So I think it's a very valuable thing to do. And it's not really traditionally what I would call a fast because you're still eating.
Right.
So it's really a program pattern of food use and food restriction in a way. And so to me, that still will have value in our culture.
Okay. Yeah. So we're talking about the circadian rhythm of the body, which is what we teach. We teach that at the Institute, that, to balance hormones, one of the first things you have to do is develop a circadian rhythm and a lifestyle that follows what we were evolved to do. So I'm glad to hear you put that exclamation point on there. Can you tell me a little bit about what someone can expect when they lean into this type of water fasting only with their blood sugar? I know blood sugar is a big thing. People say, well, my blood sugar is low, I feel terrible, I got to eat something. That's one of the common excuses.
Yeah, the problem is the instability in blood sugar is really an indication of an instability in the overall metabolism and physiology of human beings as a rule, because normally you're going to have a good 24-hour reserve of sugar in the liver and muscles that the body can lean on. So as you get more stable and healthy, my feeling is that's why you can do intermittent fasting. You can go 16 hours or so without eating quite comfortably. It's not a big discomfort once you get into the pattern of doing it. In fasting, though, when you go past that first day and now you use up the available sugar reserves, there's going to be a period where the blood sugar is going to begin to drop. And that little hypoglycemic state can be a little bit uncomfortable for people as they go through it. And you may be feeling out of sorts. You may be feeling a little bit of blood pressure change. You may feel a little bit of heart palpitation or just uneasiness and fatigue. The issue, though, is we recommend fasting purely in the resting state. So there's no physical activity when we do water-only fasting. And so the body at that time will convert parts of the protein mass of the body into sugar during that time, that very early part of fasting. But it moves away from that very quickly into now utilizing the ketone bodies produced from fat metabolism. So the blood sugar may drop and you may feel uncomfortable, but if you're resting and laying down and you're not doing anything, it's not a big issue. And in fact, you may, especially in our culture where there's so much stimulant abuse, and people are really underlyingly very exhausted, even though they look stimulated. When you take all of that away, there's going to be a crash. And so as long as they're willing to rest, sometimes that first day or two, they may just sleep around the clock as they're replenishing those energy reserves. But they got to know that it's okay. It's not anything you're going to worry about. But if you're busy and active and that happens, of course, you're freaking out because I got things to do and I feel like crap. But the bottom line is they don't need to worry about that. Even though the sugar will drop in that very first early stage, they're usually pretty stable as long as they're under resting conditions, and it's nothing to worry about.
Okay, I'm glad you clarified that too, because I remember a couple of years ago, I did have a hypoglycemic response when I was under a lot of stress. And I was not even close to my house. I was walking the dog and it was a scary feeling. So I'm glad you specified the resting part. Yeah, absolutely. So talk about the detoxification and the autophagy or autophagy, autophagy of the fasting process. Can you talk to us about that? And as a reminder, everyone, put your questions in Q&A for me and not in the chat so I can track you guys.
Yes. If you think about it, we talk about the fact that the body's breaking down fat as an energy source. And we see that quite plentifully. And it's a beautiful thing because in the fasting state, the brain is unbelievably capable of using ketones as a direct energy source. So we see a real clarity of senses when people in the past used to say, oh, you're going to have a danger of ketosis, you're going to get into a coma and unconscious. We don't see that at all with people fasting. But the bottom line is, if you think about it, fat is not only an energy reserve in the body, it's also a place where we store a lot of fat-soluble toxicity, things that we're exposed to in the environment, things that may be generated in metabolism. So that's stored in our fat tissue so that it doesn't hurt the body at large in normal blood circulation. Okay. So now if you've got that in your fat tissue and I start breaking fat tissue down as a way to feed the body in a fast, well, not only are you making ketones available for energy, you're now starting to dump a lot of that toxic debris into the bloodstream. So under that condition, the body will now mobilize that waste from the fat storage through the organs of elimination. And that's really the classic definition of detoxification. Mobilization of waste from where it's stored through the blood and out the body. And the body will use every avenue it can on a fasting state to eliminate. So it'll use your respiratory tract, it'll use your skin. In women, it'll use the vaginal canal. Any opening you have, the body will utilize as a way to eliminate that material. And so that's a very directed process, though, if you think about it, because the body's always directing its blood supply to the needs at hand. Many of the listeners think about a time when maybe you had a big holiday meal and you decided to go out and maybe work out a little too soon after eating. Well, all the blood was pooling in the digestive system to digest everything, so you didn't have it in muscles, and then you would cramp. And everybody knew if you went out swimming too soon, that was the old mother. Don't go swimming, you're going to get a cramp and die, right? So the bottom line is that the body's always directing its blood supply to the needs at hand. When you're fasting, you don't need that blood supply in the organs of digestion. You're not procuring food, you're not digesting food, so it becomes redirected to organs of elimination. So we see elimination sped up as the body now deals with that increased toxic load, and fasting becomes an incredibly profound way to promote additional detoxification.
Very interesting. Just interesting. So estrogen in our fat cells is, over accumulation of estrogen in our fat cells, people who are estrogen dominant this would probably take care of that problem. It starts getting moved out of the fat.
Yeah, what will happen is that even happens with a plant-based diet, because when you're eating plant-based, you're not eating a lot of animal foods that contain higher levels of estrogen.
Right.
So whatever estrogen you have in your bloodstream will start to drop, and the body will equilibrate that by pulling whatever you have out of fat tissue and move it out of the system. So there's actually mobilization of these hormones even, and a restoration of the hormonal environment in a way. And that's why sometimes we'll see estrogen dominant tumors or growth start to really shrink on a fast. I've had women with uterine fibroids the size of grapefruits in 2 weeks completely dissolved. So you don't see it anymore. And that's also part of the process of autophagy, which you call autophagy.
Autophagy.
In autophagy, what usually happens is the body has kind of a backup digestive system, if you think about it. In your body, you have a digestive system at large that is lined with a mucus lining, and we digest food. It's a long tube from mouth to anus. Food passes through it. But the material that gets to the cells may get there in a form that's still a little too complicated. And also, cells as they age, can have more intracellular damage, parts of the tissue that's damaged, cellular debris, broken parts, aged structured proteins that are not as functional, worn out organelles, the little organs within cells. So the body has a backup system where it can package those debris, that old worn out stuff, into little vacuoles called autophagosomes. That's where autophagy comes from. Okay. So the autophagosomes then will move to an area in the cell called a lysosome. The lysosome is full of digestive enzymes, and it will begin to digest and break down all of that debris. And not only that, it will take from that debris whatever it can, the building blocks of proteins and fats and sugars, and it'll make new stuff from the most worn out garbage that you've got in your body. It is a magical, mystical process. It would be like having a bunch of broken wood and nails and so on in the room and building the Taj Mahal from that.
Wow.
And that's exactly what the body's actually doing in autophagy. And so because there's energy available, that normal process of autophagy, when the body is no longer in a growth mode, it's not taking in insulin, it's not taking in sugar and fats and proteins, it moves into the mode of maintenance and repair, and more energy is directed at that cleanup process of autophagy. And so you see white blood cells will eat their way through tissues and tumors and growths and cysts, and cells will break down parts, and it'll just reestablish new cells and new tissue from the old worn out debris. And that process is called autophagy. And it doesn't go on in any state the way it goes on in a water-only fasting state, because you have to move from a growth phase, a growth mode when you're taking in nutrients, to a mode of maintenance and repair. And then it's remarkable. It's just a remarkable thing.
Wow, you simplified that so well. Thank you for giving us a layman's idea of what that looks like. I know I've tried to read about it before. I'm like, none of that makes any sense to me.
Well, it's so complicated because originally it was done on yeast, and the man who actually did it, the Japanese researcher, got the Nobel Prize.
Really?
For his discretion and his description of autophagy. It's that profound a process, but as it turns out, it's the fundamental process in water-only fasting.
Right. Wow. Okay. So give us a timeline on this. Like, how long does someone have to actually be, water fasting for the benefits to begin?
Well, that's interesting, because we know that the longer people fast, the longer you have to, the more involved the pathology, many times the longer you have to invest in a fasting process, as much as even 2, 3, or longer weeks of fasting.
Wow.
But we find that even in short periods, like even by 4 to 5 days, there's already a reboot of the immune system. We see worn out white blood cells being replaced. There's a stem cell activation of new white blood cells in 4 days of fasting. We see a profound change in inflammation over just 5 to 7 days of fasting. So depending on the time you have that you can invest, you'll see big changes sometimes in a relatively short period of time. But if I'm dealing with autoimmune diseases with really profound inflammation, we're looking at probably 2 to 3 weeks of fasting many times.
Wow. Okay. So past the first day, you're resting, your body's, you're getting ready. Like, is the second, third, as days go on, do you get a little bit more energy, start to feel better and make this more manageable?
That really depends on how debilitated you are coming into it. But I will tell you this, that usually when you move from that hypoglycemic first day or so protein use into fat use by the third day or so, many times the appetite starts to drop out, because now you're actually nurturing the body on your own ketone bodies. You're really literally feeding, but you're feeding on yourself. So the appetite will drop down, and that makes it a little bit easier, because I think you can appreciate that if you were ravenously hungry through this whole thing, it would be impossible.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody would stay on it, and very few people would do it. But as it turns out, that's not what happens. Appetite actually begins to really drop out. You feel relatively comfortable as your body is nurturing itself on your own fat reserves.
Okay. So basically move away from everyone you love for a couple of days, because everyone will hate you.
It's funny you say that, because I have couples that do it together. That really tests the relationship, because there's stuff that comes up. And understand that when you're going through this autophagic process and you're going through this detox process, it's not only on a physical level.
Right.
There's a lot of other things that are bound up in the body that relate to emotional passions. So many times there can be as much emotional detoxification as there is physical.
Oh, I 100% believe that. Yeah.
Come up and I get people to keep journals, and if I can help them hand-holding through that, I do. If I think they can use some psychological support, I'll bring in somebody that can do that. So
yeah.
Some of the centers have psychologists on staff to help, so people can talk to them about some of those issues that come up. But it's remarkable what can come up and how you can really process the entire mind-body picture, not just the physiological part.
Yeah, I believe that. I believe trauma can get trapped in ourselves, and sometimes if we can't access it, or our subconscious doesn't allow us to access it in a healthy way, that sounds like something that could actually be very helpful to people who are dealing with things they can't quite finish. About it. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's why it can be very useful for the addictive process too.
Right.
In addiction, let's suppose you have a compulsive eating pattern, or you're a food addict of some kind. with fasting, it's a very mindful state because you're going so internal. So you're really stepping back from the chatter of your life, like we all could probably use on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And when you do, there's a certain kind of an awareness and a mindfulness that can come up as you spend that quiet time with yourself, really having a better way to maybe assess things away from all of the constant interruptions and things that are always pulling us out of ourselves, especially with all the media blitz and all the stuff that we're always constantly dealing with. So fasting in that sense is a remarkable tool for mindful awareness that can really help in you understanding the context of your own addictive use of food and other things. So that's very useful too.
Very cool. Yeah, I did a fast many years ago. I didn't eat anything, just water right before the master cleanse. You remember the master cleanse, of course. Horrible. I had the worst pain in my hips. I could not even hardly walk or sit down. The pain was so bad in my hips. And now that you've explained this to me, I can actually go back in my mind and remember the feeling that was coming over me of the hypoglycemia and the pain and all that was just all the stuff being dumped, right?
And the master cleanse, of course, you're doing it while you're trying to stay as incredibly active as you ever were. It's very difficult because you've got to have that sense of being and paying attention to the dialogue of the body. I call it the dialogue of the body. When you're fasting, look, when we're doing everything, there's going to be some information that's coming at us. Well, most people wander around in such a state of unconsciousness because we're so busy with everything that we don't pay attention. So by the time you're finally paying attention, the body's knocking you down. You're weak, you're tired, you got a cold, you got a flu, you're run down. When if you had paid attention a little bit earlier in that process, you could have set things in motion that prevented that. Yeah. Well, in fasting, you're going to get signals to rest, and you really just need to pay attention to the dialogue of the body, because if you do, it will allow healing to go on in ways that you never even thought could happen. I mean, it's just a remarkable thing that goes on.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, so tell us who should not fast. And just you guys, I will check Q&A in just a moment here. We just want to get through some of these initial questions, but who would not be a good candidate?
Yeah, we have there's a list of things that, for example, if you have nursing mothers, I wouldn't recommend it. Breast milk will dry up during the time that you're nursing, so that's not going to work. Typical type 1 diabetics where they're not producing enough insulin, the insulin instability can be a problem during a fast. If you have anorexia, some of these major eating disorders, they're not typically in your best interest. The psychological construct is such that it's not going to be worthwhile. You've got conditions of certain hormonal conditions. There's something called porphyria, where you're not making blood cells as effectively, and some of those things, for example. If there's metastatic cancer, I don't recommend it because it will only typically make that worse. You may feel better. You won't have the pain that you may have had, but it's not going to promote quality of life. So those are kinds of some of the things. What else? We talked about type 1 diabetics. We talked about metastatic cancer, eating disorders. People on medication generally can't fast. Okay. It can only be done in a non-medicated state. Because if you think about it, if you're not eating and just putting in poisonous drugs into the system on a fast, you're going to be affecting liver, kidney, you're going to be hurting the body. So what we usually do is we have people, if they're coming off of meds or they think they can come off, we will definitely recommend that they work with the dietary stuff and then slowly come off of whatever they're on to prepare for being able maybe to get on a fast at some point. Okay. So those are the general things that we would look at that are going to be contraindications to fasting. One is fear. I mean, if I fast you and you're so uncomfortable and so fearful, there's no reason for me to push you. As a rule, what we do when we fast, we make rounds multiple times daily. So we do a lot of hand holding, a lot of talking to people. We work through the things that they're going through. And again, that usually helps people with the process. Okay. So autoimmunity, the other side of that coin, who should fast? People with sometimes it's a good jump start for obesity and metabolic disorders related to weight gain, though it's not a weight loss tool, meaning it's not a weight loss program, because a lot of times when you fast, you can put weight back on pretty regularly. But if you follow up with a plant-based non-SOS approach, no salt, oil, sugar, you'll find that that weight loss that you lose can be maintained. People with high blood pressure respond remarkably well to fasting. In fact, the studies that Dr. Goldhammer and his cohorts did out at True North in California, showed remarkable drops in blood pressure when they were at very high pathological levels, high stroke levels, 30, 40-point drops in blood pressure very quickly on water fast. And this was a 10-day protocol of water-only fasting. People with inflammatory diseases do remarkably well on fast. That means all autoimmune type diseases, rheumatoid, lupus, or just general systemic inflammation. Certain cancers like lymphoma have now shown to be very amenable to really changing and shrinking during the fasting process. Not all cancers, but that cancer in particular. So that's some of the people that would do very well in a fast.
Good. Yeah. Autoimmunity. I mean, it's an epidemic. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah. So what would be, and I'm going to ask one more question, I'm going to go into the Q&A for a moment, but what are the optimum ways to break a fast and refeed the body? So, Great
question, because the refeeding phase may be even more important than the fasting phase. We do it all. I do both the refeeding and the reactivating of activity, both very slowly. So usually we will start, depending on the length. The standard of care for most of the doctors that supervise fasts is that you take half as much time as you fasted to break the fast. So if I fast 7 days, I want 3 to 4 to break it. So if you came to me, I would recommend a 10-day stay. If you fasted 2 weeks, I would recommend another week for eating. So it would be a 3-week stay. So what we usually start off with, what I do is I start off sometimes with diluted vegetable juices, green juices, that kind of thing. We go into full strength juices. I'll add a little bit more carrot or something to get blood sugar up. Then we go into simple melons, fruits, things that are easily digested and absorbed. Then we'll go into some absorbable, raw, simple veggies, cucumber, celery, carrot. We may add a little avocado for density. And then we'll go into steamed and cooked veggies, like sweet potato, vegetables, and the like. And then we'll go into more concentrated things like legumes, grains, and so on over the period of time. So it's a slow progression from juice. And then I recommend people staying, truly plant-based. I just don't ever recommend. And I recommend if you are going to eat animal products, you wait at least a month before you even consider it after a water fast. The reason is animal products are so high in sodium without you adding any salt that you're going to be very sodium sensitive after a water fast, and you'll retain fluid so much quicker. And then there's more irritation on the liver. It's nice to ease in very plant-based. And many times once you fast, it improves your resolve to even get onto a better eating pattern. That's one of the beautiful things that happens with fasting too.
Kind of like a reset. Yeah, absolutely.
A reboot and a reset.
Okay, so let's roll through some of these questions here. Stan is asking, do you agree it's a good idea or best idea to do 3 or 4 days of vegetables and fruits only prior to starting a fast? Or what's the prep process to going into something like this?
That's a good question, because what happens is if you come in and you're eating very conventionally and you're doing caffeine and sugar and stimulants, you're going to have a much more brutal time of withdrawal at the very beginning. And you can make your life a lot easier by coming off of all of those things for probably a whole week or so before you even come to the fast. And getting on a good eating plan, a very clean plant-based approach for 3 or 4 days before is a great idea. And oftentimes we recommend that. In fact, I'll even recommend it a little longer sometimes, depending on the history of the person. So I like them coming in a little bit more prepared that way. I think it's a better way, because you get a lot more done quicker on the fast rather than the body having to deal with those very recent stimulants and abuses that it has to process now before you get into other levels of healing and change.
Right. Yeah. Great. Okay. There's a couple of questions that were already covered, you guys. So if I don't ask it, it's because we've already talked about it. Lauren's basically saying nothing, right? No lemon or anything, just water on the fast.
Water only fasting. For an extended period of time.
Okay. And Joyce is asking, resting is recommended, but is it okay to exercise if you want to?
No, it's not. And the reason is, think about this. Let's do it 2 things. We'll do the lemon and the exercise together. Lemon is a carbohydrate. Once you put that in, you shift the body away from that whole issue of gluconeogenesis. Even modest amounts of lemon will create a carbohydrate intake. So we don't want any of that going on. As far as activity, think about this. Energy cannot be everywhere at the same time. So if you drive it into muscles for activity, it will be diverted away from whatever the healing process is you're trying to engender. So what will happen is it can slow down the healing. And there's another problem we also find. People that are more active on fast have much more hypoglycemic potential into the fast when they normally wouldn't. And they will break down protein more dramatically, because when you're active, the body needs sugar input more dramatically, and it will convert and break down muscle mass protein for that. If you're resting, it's very comfortable just leaning on fat reserve for an energy source in the resting state. So we do not recommend. Now, for me, my place is beautiful because it's right on the ocean. So I will allow people to come down, sit in a lecture, or come down and just go lay on the beach if they want for a short while, getting as much fresh air as possible. But there's no physical activity of any kind really during the fasting state. And we don't even allow people to leave the grounds. I mean, you have to really understand that this is a very conservative resting process, that we're trying to harbor that energy for the work of healing and change.
I can't even imagine wanting to move my body in that state.
No, she's got a point. That people that will get bursts of energy, especially if you've been run down with all the garbage and stuff you've been doing. Sometimes as you clear some of that out, you may have this burst of energy. And you know, human beings, as soon as we have it, we want to burn it up. And so the bottom line here is we're trying to get you to hold on to it so it can be redirected for a lot of very deep internal healing and cleansing and work.
Awesome. Okay. Good question by Linda here, of course. She's always got great questions. If a person has lower body fat, does that become a concern with water fasting?
Not really, because in a way, if you think about it, the body has a certain wisdom about it. It will direct its fat and weight loss based on many times the body type that you have. So people that are much more overweight and bigger oftentimes will have a bigger drop in weight initially. The weight loss will probably average out to somewhere around a pound a day, but it can start off as much as 2 to 3 pounds a day at the very beginning of that. And sometimes the leaner you are, if you have a dynamic metabolism, there can be quite a dramatic shift going on. But as a rule, there's usually enough reserve for the body to stay in that feeding stage rather than in what we'll call a starvation stage. Okay. I have yet, after even the longest fast, found even in excess of 30, 40 days, have anyone that really bordered on going into starvation. They were still in that mode of fasting. And I'm making that distinction between fasting and starvation because they are two different things.
Two different things. Great. Okay, so wouldn't a drop in blood sugar cause your cortisol levels to stay elevated?
Again, there's going to be some of those little shifts that happen initially because when you have a drop in blood sugar, the body perceives that as a stressful event, and the adrenal glands will produce cortisol to deal with the stress of hypoglycemia. So there will be a little bit of that, but it's interesting that that changes because the body's moving into fat metabolism relatively quickly in a resting state.
Right.
And I'm going to emphasize again the resting state.
Yes.
Because under those conditions, you're going to shift that in the direction you want. If you have a lot of movement, that will become a much bigger problem. Yeah. Because if you think about it, if you're resting and conserving energy and you're dropping sugar, your body's not going to be quite as concerned because you don't need a lot of sugar for activity. But if you're pushing activity and the sugar drops, the whole brain is like, oh my God, I need to create energy. This is such a stressful situation, and it's going to provoke more cortisol release. So the cortisol levels will be rectified and managed very, very carefully. But that first day or two can be a little bit uncomfortable when it's first shifting into that fat metabolism. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's all paradise. Fasting can be a very painful and can be a very crazy kind of an experience for some people. And some people, you just need to know that that dance of metabolism and detoxification and healing is going to go on. And sometimes it's like going to hell and back.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, any big change in our lives, any huge shift or change is going to not be comfortable. I mean, obviously,
Some people will go through a 21-day fast like nothing happened. There's other people go through 3 or 4 days and you think they died and went to hell. I mean, it's very variable on that person. And that's why we never really give a full time limit. I like to have the time where we can monitor it day by day and make that decision day by day.
Yeah.
It's a very day by day process for me.
Okay. All right. Donna's saying, this was a question I had as well, because I have Hashimoto's autoimmunity and I take 25 micrograms of thyroid medication in the morning. And she's saying, what about fasting on thyroid medications or bioidentical hormones?
When we have hormone replacement, we fast with hormone replacement. Those are the only drugs that we fully allow. Because to me, you're just supporting the organ and its normal endocrine function. So if you need to take hormone replacement, and thyroid is a classic example, one of the ones where we absolutely allow thyroid hormone replacement on a water fast.
Okay, great. So Kate says, regarding cancer, my husband has prostate cancer in an early stage. Should he not fast? He's doing moderated fast with 0 carbs.
He's doing moderate what?
Moderated fast with 0 carbs.
No, see the whole plant-based approach is really the way to go. And that includes really not moderate carbs, but good carbs with high fiber.
Yeah.
You know, it's very intriguing. And let me diverge just for a second, because this is a great question. Dean Ornish did a great study on men with non-operable prostate cancer. And what they did is they actually biopsied the cancer tissue in these early stage prostates like her husband has. And they looked at the genes that are contained in that cancer. And we now know that there's a whole litany of genes in every cell and cancer cells that are turned on when you're promoting cancer and turned off when it's not. So what they did is they took these men and put them on a plant-based approach for about 12 weeks. And this plant-based approach included a full spectrum of high-carb foods that were high in fiber, plant-based foods, no refined carbs, but certainly fruits, vegetables, all of that. And then when they monitored them again, what they discovered was that the men had a significant drop in PSAs, but get this, 450 genes that are normally involved in cancer promotion were completely turned off by that diet. And not only that, in the next year, the men that stayed on that had 8 times less cancer growth than the men who did not in the prostate. So I would argue that without even fasting, just getting onto this lifestyle approach, that's a complete non-SOS plant-based lifestyle with activity, because activity and stress management are also pieces that help this. And then even water fasting in the early stage may be quite provocative in the autophagic and the autophagic process to help to reduce the body's ability to produce that. And so if he's in a place where he can take a wait and see attitude, I would wait and see along with the high quality non-SOS plant-based approach and maybe some short period of fasting that would allow him to move away from the growth mode into this mode of really starting to create an autophagic breakdown of any of that tumor tissue.
Great, that's good information. All right, can we talk a little bit about the impact of essential fatty acids when we're balancing the immune system and what the function is there?
Yeah, you know, look, we know fatty acids are the building blocks of all fats, right? And fat is a macronutrient that we can't live without. The only problem is in our culture, we're told that we need so much more than what we actually need. We only need about 10 to 15% of the total diet coming from fat, which is really about a half ounce to about an ounce and a half a day. But in that building blocks of fats, there are 2 what we call essential fatty acids. That the essential means 2 things. One, we need them, but even more importantly, we can't make them. Basically, so they have to come in the food that we eat. So as it turns out, there's 2 families, which I'm sure all your viewers know of, the omega-6 and omega-3. In the omega-6 family, you have linoleic acid. Omega-3, you have alpha-linolenic, right? The thing about the omega-3s, though, is that why are they essential? Why do we need them? Well, they're balancing the function of 2 primary systems in the body. One is the nervous system, by the way, because it's involved in creating all of the parts of the myelin sheath for the rapidly conducting nerves in the body. And diseases like multiple sclerosis, when you're breaking down that fatty lining, have all the disturbances of neurological communication. And so a case can be made that MS is almost like an autoimmune breakdown of the myelin sheath. But on another level is the immune system. And so what does the immune system do? It has to be able to recognize everything that we are and everything that we're not, right? So as it turns out, the immune system's involved with generating a healthy inflammatory process and a healthy fever response in case you have a bacterial or viral infection. So not only do you have to be able to create a fever or an inflammatory process, but you also have to be able to control it. Because if you have a fever that runs away or an inflammatory process that's not controlled, that's going to be dangerous to the body too. So the chemicals that both stimulate and suppress those balancing functions of the immune system are the class of compounds we call prostaglandins. And the only way you can make prostaglandins is from the essential fatty acids. So without those fatty acids, we don't have a balance of the immune system. But here's the kicker. On the omega-6 side of the equation, the linoleic acid, that fatty acid, will produce an even longer unsaturated fatty acid called arachidonic acid, which is the most dominant fatty acid in the membranes of all animal cells, including us. And why? because it is so unsaturated, that it is so liquid and so mobile, that it allows a very youthful movement of things through all of the cell membranes. Food we take in, waste we eliminate. So the body in its wisdom creates these highly unsaturated fats that feed that membrane that makes up the cell barrier and border of every cell of the body. So all cell membranes are a protein fat sandwich, and the dominant fatty acid in that membrane is arachidonic acid. But that means arachidonic acid then is found in all animal cells primarily.
Right.
So normally the body, if it takes linoleic from cashews or grains or even a piece of meat, it can make its own arachidonic acid. But that pattern, that arachidonic acid, feeds the prostaglandins that increase inflammation. Now we need them, but we need to control them. So if you had that going on, you would make enough of those. Here's the problem. 80% of people in the United States are taking their protein and fat from what? From animal sources. So they're so exaggerating the arachidonic acid content of the diet that they're promoting prostaglandins that dramatically exaggerate inflammation. So by eating the fatty acids primarily from animal sources, you're exaggerating the inflammatory side of the equation. On the alpha-linolenic side, with that fatty acids coming from deep greens, it's coming from seeds like chia and flax, avocado, whole grains, and even fish. Problem is with fish, it's so contaminated with mercury, it's so dyed with fish farms with contaminants that promote obesity that we don't need to do that. But that produces a form of prostaglandin that is absolutely anti-inflammatory. So as our diet shifted from a decided plant base, as they did from the early part of the 20th century, because immigrants were very poor, they ate inexpensive foods like grains, legumes, and the like. That diet was very anti-inflammatory. As we became more affluent through the 20th century, we opted for the diet of affluence, which was more animal fat, dairy products, refined sugar. And guess what happened? We created the inflammatory diseases of affluence.
Yes.
So here's what I recommend. Here's my golden ticket for the viewers. If you look at the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 oils in the diet, omega-6 being the animal-based products, omega-3 being the plant-based products, omega-6 being inflammation, omega-3 being anti-inflammation. Most Americans are eating a diet, the ratio omega-6 to omega-3, of about 15 to 30 to 1, highly inflammatory.
Yeah.
We're recommending reversing that diet to 1/2, an absolute reversal of that ratio. So when you're eating, and you don't need to be a biochemist, as you move into more of a plant-based manner, you're reversing that ratio. And when you do, you will reduce the outcome of inflammation. And right now we know that inflammation is the foundation for most of the disabling diseases that kill most of us. Heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes are diseases of inflammation.
Right.
So by just eating in a way that shifts that ratio in the omega-6 to omega-3, the essential fatty acids, you can get a handle on never creating inflammatory change in your body again.
Okay. So that leads us into the question, and I know someone's going to ask it, so I'm going to ask it now.
Yeah.
When is it okay and appropriate to supplement with the essential fatty acids? Because everyone thinks just taking an omega-3 capsule is a healthy thing to do.
Well, here's the thing. If you think about it, what's the most common supplement that many people get? Fish oil, right? Because the fish is going to have that omega-3 side. And understand that just the same way the body made arachidonic acid from linoleic, it made a long unsaturated fatty acid to put in membranes. On the omega-3 side, it will take the basic alpha-linolenic acid and also make longer unsaturated fatty acids like EPA and DHA. So they're part of that omega-3 family. And we know that those fatty acids are absolutely essential for neurological health. So people with depression, for example, EPA is probably a better antidepressant than many of the drugs that are used. Yeah. And then from EPA, there's an enzymatic reaction where the body can make DHA. But the observation is that you can make all the EPA and DHA you need by eating the high quality alpha-linolenic foods. Right. But if you're concerned, you can take plant-based supplements of EPA, which are made from things like the ahi flower, AHI, or you can take preformed DHA from algae and those kinds of like vegetable plant-based supplements. So you could do it without having to go into the fish world. I counsel a lot of vegans, and if I think that that is something where their diet is not loaded enough in those rich alpha-linolenic foods, deep greens, avocado, whole grains, and all of that, they may benefit by that supplement. And many doctors practice what I like to call protect your ass nutrition, meaning they don't care about any of that. We're going to just routinely recommend that you take it. So if you feel comfortable doing that, I don't feel so uncomfortable about you doing that. But the bottom line is I don't recommend a lot of supplements because I think whole food nutrition is where it's at. But in this case, if you wanted to take a vegan source of EPA or DHA, could you do it? Yeah, you could do it. And my feeling is that would be where I kind of would draw the line with that. I think that's okay, but I would urge you to eat an abundance of those rich alpha-linolenic foods that the body naturally will produce and convert into EPA and DHA. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Food's always best. It's always, I mean, supplement is called supplement for a reason. If you can't get it with what you're eating. It's not
substitution, it's supplementation. That's what
exactly. Yeah. Perfect. Okay, so Donna is asking, would water fasting be helpful therapy for someone with SIBO, small bacterial intestinal overgrowth?
Yeah, the problem with it is that you're always worried about the compromise of life itself. So there may be a need to really deal with that a little bit more forcefully in terms of the bacterial population. I would probably want to see that under control a little bit more before I took that on and maybe had somebody that could go into some, some other thing. But again, if the person was pretty stable with it, would I do it? I probably would try to do it and alter and see if the flora can improve and lighten it up and see if all of the bacterial population of the gut itself can start to normalize in a way and help that a little bit. So I wouldn't necessarily fast that process the same way I probably wouldn't necessarily fast an extensive case of Lyme disease just for the same reason. I mean, I think if there is a place where you may want to regulate the bacterial population and there was a low dose antibiotic coupled with really good quality nutrition, it may be something that you may want to think about initially on. So I would rethink that in a way myself.
Okay. Great. So what about fasting with leukemia?
Same issues. When you got this neutropenia, when you're dealing with this stuff with blood cell changes and you get high and you get these white blood counts that soar through the roof. I have fasted people with that and they have had drops and more regulation. Generally speaking, I find that the long-term application of this kind of an eating plan, especially if it's more of the chronic lymphocytic leukemic type in the adult. In the acute stage in children, I wouldn't play around with it. I mean, I would be too concerned that you would be putting someone in jeopardy. The chronic case, there are people that are a little bit more stable and they respond well to detoxification and lifestyle change. And I've seen that. And so I think that there it would have more value in combination with the kind of diet we're recommending.
Okay, perfect. So Kirsten is saying, and I like this question because I mean, it's a curious question. Fasting made me a food snob. I only want high quality foods. If a meal is made with low quality foods, I detect it right away. Is it possible that she cleaned up her taste buds, that her senses have become more keen with fasting?
No question. We find that there's an acute improvement in taste sensitivity with fat. In fact, there's a study that's being completed now on just that, taste sensitivity following fasting.
Wow.
And the bottom line is that if you think about it, the taste buds in the mouth are attached to nerves that go back to your brain, that when they are stimulated, if the threshold of stimulation is achieved, they'll fire an impulse and then your brain will tell you that that was salty or sweet or whatever, right?
Right.
But the more condiments and additives and things we add to the diet that way, what happens is you exaggerate that threshold so that now it takes more stimulation before you can taste anything. I mean, think about how many people out there that are listening know someone that before they even taste their food, they got a salt shaker going. It's like, oh.
Yeah.
And then the comment is, oh, the food is so tasteless. It's not the food that's tasteless. They are. Because you can't taste anything till it exceeds that threshold. Now, eating in a clearer way without salt, oil, sugar, but especially fasting, dramatically improves that taste sensitivity. So that now you're getting excited about simple things that before you couldn't even taste. We'll have people come off of water fast, have a piece of plain romaine lettuce, and then sit there waxing philosophical for, oh, this lettuce, oh, this lettuce, oh. And they're going crazy about the taste of this stuff when before they couldn't even taste it. And if you think about that, when you have that sense of satisfaction because your taste is so improved, there's going to be less craving, less overeating. A lot of things will dramatically improve and really improve the quality of your life and probably the quality of your weight, quality of your health, all of it.
Yeah. So can you imagine what not we, because my kid doesn't like salt or any of that stuff, but are doing to children with ketchup? I mean, ketchup on everything. Gosh, by the time they hit 20s, they're not going to be able to taste anything.
Well, if you think about it, the food processing industry is where most people get the high levels of sodium that they consume.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it, most refined processed products are fundamentally tasteless.
Yes.
They're basically cardboard, synthetic chemicals of a variety of kinds, what self-respecting primate like us is going to pluck down our hard-earned cash to buy this crap that's fundamentally tasteless? Well, no one. But the largest surface area of the tongue is devoted to the taste of saltiness. The most precise, exquisite taste area is the tip of the tongue devoted to salt. So if you want to make fundamentally tasteless products palatable for people to spend all their money on, what do you got to add back? Salt and sugar. So it's why those are the two biggest additives in the food processing industry, because no one would buy that crap without it. That's so foods like ketchups and other things, they're loaded with those products to sell that product.
Of course they are. So Linda, we want to clear something up for Linda here. I'm a little confused about whether a person on medications should not take their meds during a fast, or that they should not fast at all if on any medications, because typically those are the people who want to improve their health.
If they're on medication that they cannot get off of because it's a medical situation, they cannot fast on those meds. If, for example, they're taking a blood pressure med and they start an eating plan, or even I would wait till I would usually feed them and monitor that pressure to the point where the body lets me know that they no longer need to be on that med. I'm not a medical physician, so I can't change the prescription pattern for those people.
Yep.
At True North, for example, they have medical doctors on staff that can work with those meds a little bit, so they can monitor that and change it. But as a rule, the only medication I allow people to fast with, as I mentioned before, is hormone replacement, like thyroid meds or something in that regard. If you are on a med, I will not tell you to come off it. You have to make that decision with your physician. And then if you can back it off, because many times if you're on drugs to lower blood pressure or blood sugar, you can get off of those very quickly with this kind of an eating plan. And then you can move into a fasting state. But I wouldn't do it while you're taking those drugs. No.
Okay. So this is my personal question. So, one of the main suggestions or recommendations for people when they're diagnosed with cancer in our functional world that we live in as coaches and naturopathic doctors and so on is the Gerson method, or the Gerson, right? Gerson method of all the vegetables and all that.
The original Gerson method was based on a basically raw food, plant, fruit, and vegetable approach. And Gerson, back in the day, it was an amazing thing. I don't know if people have read his book, A Result of 50 Cases, where he goes through 50 cases of very severe cancer, and with x-rays and other things shows the remarkable change that occurred by virtue of that raw food program. And then, of course, he felt that the detoxification was so profound that people sometimes were dying because of their own detoxification. So he started doing coffee enemas. And his idea with coffee enemas was to promote some liver detox through the hemorrhoidal veins, to try to support the detox process a little bit more dramatically. And so he started doing coffee enemas around the day, around the clock. The truth of the matter is he had great results in what he did. Unfortunately, he was doing it at a time when cancer chemo was starting to get its heyday of inception, and he basically got tarred and feathered, and then his daughter wound up moving it to Mexico and whatever else they did. But it just shows you the power of just even eating in a whole food, plant-based manner for resolving some of these profound changes. So my feeling is, in an early stage of cancer or any stage of cancer, that's a choice you can make. Sometimes if it's a cancer that's well contained, and I think pruning the tree with some surgical intervention would be valuable, and then followed by this way of eating. Sometimes people have done that, and it's very successful. So there's a number of ways to go, but there's no question that this way of eating and living is going to give you the greatest chance to prevent that outcome. And in early stages, probably to change it quite profoundly if you're willing to make the commitment. But
Right.
it's a commitment. It really is a commitment.
Yeah, I can see that. So we've got just a couple minutes left. Let me roll through some of these more other questions here.
Of course.
I love Lauren's question. What do patients do while they're resting at your clinic?
That's a great question. You spend a lot of time with yourself. Now, at my clinic, I lecture every day so they can come down and see, because my program is run in a hotel. So we have the private spaces. So they have beautiful, luxurious rooms overlooking the ocean, and they can come down the elevator and sit and lecture. I allow them to sit and get air by the ocean. It's just right a few feet outside our door. So I allow a little bit more outside air, but a lot of times you're reading inspirational things, you're just resting, you may be meditating a little bit. I allow people to watch movies or listen to music, but you got to realize this is also about resting the senses too. So I get them to look at inspirational things, but just take the introspective time with themselves to just sit back and get into that mindfulness. And what happens is it sounds like it's not going to go on and it's going to be such an arduous thing to do that, but it's really not. It winds up actually, and as pressurized as many of us are, it winds up being a luxury that people really love. Finally being able to have that quiet time by themselves, because let's face it, very few of us have that anymore.
Oh, I agree. I take my 15 minutes of meditation and it's sacred to me. It is absolutely sacred. So I would agree with that. I would love to have more time for it, but I'm lucky to get that 15 minutes.
That's right. Yeah, it's a lovely reverential time. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So Linda's asking, what test or method is used to determine the difference between fasting and starving? How do you guys determine that?
When people come in, understand they have to go through an extensive physical exam, an extensive blood work. We do it sometimes right after. Sometimes, depending on crisis, we may draw blood in the middle of a fast. So if I have an autoimmune person and I'm looking like I'm getting a flare-up, I may do a test and look at the state of inflammation, and we're monitoring all of that. Usually from a vital sign standpoint, we find that in fasting, because you're leaning on reserves, it's a place of stability. So if you check pressure, blood pressure, it gets lower, but it gets very stable and evens out, and the person is very comfortable and stable. When you've gone past food reserves, where you're no longer leaning on reserves and you move into the state of starvation, chaos is the rule, usually. Body temperature will drop and just keep dropping. Blood pressure will drop and it becomes, it keeps dropping. Everything becomes quite unstable. In fasting, you see just a new homeostatic balance at a lower level of function, but very, very stable. So just from vital signs, which is why we check them twice daily on every person. I go to every room twice daily. We evaluate, we weigh, we do urine analysis, we look at tongue, we look at breath, we do whatever we check everything. And we check the state of ketosis. I can smell it on the breath. The breath smells like acetone, like nail polish remover. So you know they're in the state of ketosis. So we do certain vital checks. We do certain body checks. We may check urine, blood. We'll do a number of whatever we need to do to check it.
Okay, perfect. All right, we got time for two more here. So Stan's asking a good question. What do you think about organic open range chicken eggs? Not plant-based, obviously.
I don't recommend any animal products at all.
None at all. Okay.
Because the bottom line is, whether you eat an organic egg or not, eggs are one of the highest sources of methionine, which will promote homocysteine, which we know is a vascular toxin related to cognitive dementia. Even Michael Greger has shown that even 1 to 2 eggs a week is one of the biggest increased risk factors for something like leukemia. I mean, you wouldn't think so, but the bottom line is these foods have no place in the human body, in my opinion. And so I teach a solely whole food, plant-based approach without added salt, oil, and sugar. And if you're going to add a little salt, oil, and sugar, but at least get away from the animal, God bless you, I would still recommend it. And for me, it's also an issue that takes place on other levels in terms of violence data, environmental support. There's many other pieces of that for me. I won't go into it all now, but from a biological and physiological standpoint, there's not a person on this planet that needs to eat animal products in any way, shape, or form at this point.
Okay, great. All right. The last question.
And by the way, I've done that for over 40 years myself, just so you know.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I went 23 years without red meat or pork, and I have a
family of 5 children that way, by the way, too.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, you're starting to shift my brain a little bit back to my old ways of thinking from 25 years ago, which is a good thing. That's what this is about. Yeah. So, all right. So we're going to wrap up, but I'm going to be sharing, when we do the replay, you guys, we're going to be sending out information about a gift certificate and, discount towards a stay there. And I'm going to encourage you guys to share this anywhere, and not just for you guys, but share it if you have clients or you've got people in your family or friends that could benefit from this type of retreat. I mean, I can think of 5 people right off the bat right now that I'm going to be sharing it with as well. But that'll go out.
And we're at balanceforlifeflorida.com, just so
Yep.
they know that, okay?
Yep, I'm going to copy it right now. I'm going to put it in the chat. And I'm also going to make sure that it goes out with the replay. The last thing I wanted to ask, because it was up on the board earlier, was about parasites and things like that. Does fasting actually help to detox parasites and pathogens? And
well, what happens is the parasitical stuff, what will happen is sometimes it will promote some balance and better balance of all of that. Sometimes if it's more of a threat, they may have to be treated in a more natural way with herbs and seeds and other things that sometimes can do that. And sometimes with things that are a little bit more intense. But there are times when parasitical changes can be quite regulated by the fasting state.
Okay. Now, do you have, and this is my personal question, do you have a guide, a book? Do you have a book that's on this protocol, or do you prefer everyone absolutely be supervised every single time?
There are sites. True North has a site called fasting.org. On
Okay.
my site, I have fasting blogs all the time. We have all of that. If you look up Dr. Frank Sabatino on YouTube, there are a couple of interviews that are focused purely on fasting only.
Yeah, they're good interviews, you guys. I've watched them.
So there's that data is out there. I have a book that I have written called Weightless: Compassionate Weight Loss for Life. It's in its final stages. That'll be available. It's not there yet. There's an entire section of fasting in that book, both fasting and intermittent fasting. So there's a lot of good information available for people that want to pursue this a little further.
Okay, awesome.
And a lot of good online information that's easily accessible. So
yeah, well, you've been a wealth of information, and I just appreciate you so much bringing some light to this topic that's been floating around with the health coaches in all of our groups, and giving us some facts that we can actually lean on. So I very much appreciate you and your time, and I know how busy you are. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, and I thank all the audience members that listen to this too. Thank you.
Absolutely. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you so much.
Okay,
bye-bye.